Chapter 11 of Zastrozzi, a Romance. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Zastrozzi, a Romance, by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Chapter 11. At last the day arrived when Matilda expected Ferdinand's return. Punctual to his time, Ferdinand returned, and told Matilda that Zastrozzi had for the present taken up his abode at a cottage not far from thence, and that he there awaited her arrival. Matilda was much surprised that Zastrozzi preferred a cottage to her castella, but dismissing that from her mind, hastily prepared to attend him. She soon arrived at the cottage. Zastrozzi met her. He quickened his pace towards her. "Well, Zastrozzi!" exclaimed Matilda inquiringly.
"Oh," said Zastrozzi, "our schemes have all as yet been unsuccessful. Julia yet lives, and, surrounded by wealth and power, yet defies our vengeance. I was planning her destruction, when, obedient to your commands, I came here."
"Alas!" exclaimed Matilda, "I fear it must be ever thus. But, Zastrozzi, much I need your advice, your assistance. Long have I languished in hopeless love. Often have I expected, and as often have my eager expectations been blighted by disappointment." A deep sigh of impatience burst from Matilda's bosom, as, unable to utter more, she ceased.
"'Tis but the image of that accursed Julia," replied Zastrozzi, "revelling in his breast, which prevents him from becoming instantly yours. Could you but efface that?"
"I wish I could efface it," said Matilda. "The friendship which now exists between us would quickly ripen into love, and I should be forever happy. How, Zastrozzi, can that be done? But before we think of happiness, we must have a care to our safety. We must destroy Julia, who yet endeavours by every means to know the event of Verezzi's destiny. But, surrounded by wealth and power as she is, how can that be done? No bravo in Naples dare attempt her life. No rewards, however great, could tempt the most abandoned of men to brave instant destruction in destroying her. And should we attempt it, the most horrible tortures of the Inquisition, a disgraceful death, and that without the completion of our desire, would be the consequence."
"Think not so, Matilda," answered Zastrozzi. "Think not, because Julia possesses wealth, that she is less assailable by the dagger of one eager for revenge as I am, or that, because she lives in splendour at Naples, that a poisoned chalice, prepared by your hand, the hand of a disappointed rival, could not send her writhing and convulsed to the grave. No, no, she can die, nor shall we writhe on the rack."
"Oh!" interrupted Matilda, "I care not if, writhing in the prisons of the Inquisition, I suffer the most excruciating torment. I care not if, exposed to public view, I suffer the most ignominious and disgraceful of deaths, if, before I die, if, before this spirit seeks another world, I gain my purposed design, I enjoy unutterable and as yet inconceivable happiness." The evening meanwhile came on, and warned by the lateness of the hour to separate, Matilda and Zastrozzi parted. Zastrozzi pursued his way to the cottage, and Matilda, deeply musing, retraced her steps to the castella. The wind was fresh and rather tempestuous. Light fleeting clouds were driven rapidly across the dark blue sky. The moon in silver majesty hung high in eastern ether, and rendered transparent as a celestial spirit the shadowy clouds which at intervals crossed her orbit, and by degrees vanished like a vision in the obscurity of distant air. On this scene gazed Matilda. A train of confused thought took possession of her soul. Her crimes, her past life, rose in array to her terror-struck imagination. Still burning love, unrepressed, unconquerable passion, revelled through every vein. Her senses, rendered delirious by guilty desire, were whirled around in an inexpressible ecstasy of anticipated delight, delight not unmixed by confused apprehensions. She stood thus, with her arms folded, as if contemplating the spangled concavity of heaven. It was late, later than the usual hour of return, and Verezzi had gone out to meet Matilda. "What, deep in thought, Matilda?" exclaimed Verezzi, playfully. Matilda's cheek, as he thus spoke, was tinged with a momentary blush. It, however, quickly passed away, and she replied, "I was enjoying the serenity of the evening, the beauty of the setting sun, and then the congenial twilight induced me to wander farther than usual." The unsuspicious Verezzi observed nothing peculiar in the manner of Matilda, but observing that the night air was chill, conducted her back to the castella. No art was left untried, no blandishment omitted on the part of Matilda to secure her victim. Everything which he liked, she affected to admire. Every sentiment uttered by Verezzi was always anticipated by the observing Matilda. But long was all in vain. Long was every effort to obtain his love useless. Often, when she touched the harp, and drew sounds of enchanting melody from its strings, whilst her almost celestial form bent over it, did Verezzi gaze enraptured, and, forgetful of everything else, yielding himself to a tumultuous oblivion of pleasure, listened entranced. But all her art could not draw Julia from his memory. He was much softened towards Matilda. He felt esteem, tenderest esteem, but he yet loved not. Thus passed the time. Often would desperation, and an idea that Verezzi would never love her, agitate Matilda with most violent agony. The beauties of nature which surrounded the castella had no longer power to interest. Borne away on swelling thought, often, in the solitude of her own apartment, her spirit was wafted on the wings of anticipating fancy. Sometimes imagination portrayed the most horrible images for futurity. Verezzi's hate, perhaps his total dereliction of her, his union with Julia, pressed upon her brain and almost drove her to distraction, for Verezzi alone filled every thought. Nourished by restless reveries, the most horrible anticipations blasted the blooming Matilda. Sometimes, however, a gleam of sense shot across her soul. Deceived by visions of unreal bliss, she acquired new courage and fresh anticipations of delight from a beam which soon withdrew its ray. For, usually sunk in gloom, her dejected eyes were fixed on the ground, though sometimes an ardent expression, kindled by the anticipation of gratified desire, flashed from their fiery orbits. Often, while thus agitated by contending emotions, her soul was shook, and, unconscious of its intentions, knew not the most preferable plan to pursue. Would she seek Zastrozzi? On him, unconscious why, she relied much. His words were those of calm reflection and experience, and his sophistry, whilst it convinced her that a superior being exists not who can control our actions, brought peace to her mind, peace to be succeeded by horrible and resistless conviction of the falsehood of her coadjutor's arguments. Still, however, they calmed her, and, by addressing her reason and passions at the same time, deprived her of the power of being benefited by either. The health of Verezzi, meanwhile, slowly mended. His mind, however, shook by so violent a trial as it had undergone, recovered not its vigour, but, mellowed by time, his grief, violent and irresistible as it had been at first, now became a fixed melancholy, which spread itself over his features, was apparent in every action, and, by resistance, inflamed Matilda's passion to tenfold fury. The touching tenderness of Verezzi's voice, the dejected, softened expression of his eye, touched her soul with tumultuous yet milder emotions. In his presence she felt calmed, and those passions which in solitude were almost too fierce for endurance, when with him were softened into a tender though confused delight. It was one evening, when no previous appointment existed between Matilda and Zastrozzi, that, overcome by disappointed passion, Matilda sought the forest. The sky was unusually obscured, the sun had sunk beneath the western mountain, and its departing ray tinged the heavy clouds with a red glare. The rising blast sighed through the towering pines, which rose loftily above Matilda's head. The distant thunder, hoarse as the murmurs of the grove, in indistinct echoes mingled with the hollow breeze. The scintillating lightning flashed incessantly across her path, as Matilda, heeding not the storm, advanced along the trackless forest. The crashing thunder now rattled madly above, the lightnings flashed a larger curve, and at intervals, through the surrounding gloom, showed a scathed larch, which, blasted by frequent storms, reared its bare head on a height above. Matilda sat upon a fragment of jutting granite, and contemplated the storm which raged around her. The portentous calm, which at intervals occurred amid the reverberating thunder, portentous of a more violent tempest, resembled the serenity which spread itself over Matilda's mind, a serenity only to be succeeded by a fiercer paroxysm of passion. Chapter 11. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.